shell had just landed. Because of the dearth of detailed descriptions of what British soldiers were thinking as they held the line, I cannot say definitively that Waldron's feelings were typical. However, I suspect that many of the soldiers manning the edge of the perimeter around Dunkirk had to overcome similar demons. If I am correct, then Waldron's unique history is essential listening for those who wish to appreciate what they achieved. Many of the British soldiers who fought on until the bitter end were either captured, wounded, or killed. But there were some who battled on, walking at night and hiding by day until they eventually made it to the coast, just in time to be evacuated along with everyone else. If one is attempting to describe all the consequences of the rearguard actions, it would be wrong to omit stories of such escapes. That is why I have decided to highlight the account by 2nd Lieutenant Julian Fane of the 2nd Battalion, the Gloucestershire Regiment, Personal Account 4. The long list of obstacles that he had to overcome to make it back to Dunkirk after participating in the rearguard action at Cassel emphasises just how much luck and valour were needed if a man was to successfully break through the German lines. After listening to his chronicle, it is easy to see why in the course of my research I never found a similar report to rival it. Not surprisingly, many of those who were wounded during those desperate rearguard actions ended up in one of Dunkirk's casualty clearing stations. The doctors and medical orderlies caring for them had to risk losing their own liberty or even their lives. As a tribute to all such men, who decided that doing their duty was paramount, I have highlighted a moving account by one of them, the Sergeant Major Philip Newman, Personal Account 5, who cared for the amputees and the maimed at the 12th Casualty Clearing Station in Rosendale, a Dunkirk suburb. Newman was one of the medics who stayed behind to look after the wounded at Dunkirk until the Germans took over the evacuated town. In some ways, one can say that his self-sacrifice at Dunkirk was even more admirable than the soldiers'. Unlike the soldiers who fought in the rearguard actions, he probably never anticipated that his military service would bring him into contact with Germans. Yet when it came to the crunch, he was steadfast. That did not mean he did not experience moments of weakness. The depiction of his abject misery as he watched his fellow countrymen abandoning him at the end of the evacuation is all the more poignant because in some respects he was not a natural do-gooder. He was mortified when his name was 17th out of the hat during the medic's ballot held to decide which of the CCS medical team should look after the wounded until the Germans took over. The emotional impact of his testimony makes an enduring point, which perhaps is the most important theme running through this material. Courage is not just the preserve of the recklessly daring. True bravery requires a painful struggle to quell one's baser instincts in order to do an act which could have disastrous consequences. As well as including text which celebrates such bravery, I would like this edition, being published as it is during the centenary of the First World War, to highlight the most important repercussions of the lessons learned between 1914 and 1918, which affected the outcome in 1940. Of those fighting in 1940, the German commanders appear to have learned more than anyone from their successes and failures during the First World War. For example, their experience on the defensive during the 1916 Battle of the Somme had taught them that if sufficient shells or bombs were rained down on soldiers in trenches, then a quick follow-up infantry attack would be able to capture even the best dug-in positions. Because they had acted on this lesson learned and had manufactured thousands of planes whose bombs could reach the French side of the River Meuse, they were able to terrorize the French troops dug in alongside the river in May 1940, thereby rendering vulnerable positions which would otherwise have been impregnable. The Germans also showed the world how to make the most of their tanks. Having learned from the British failure to exploit their tanks decisively on the Somme, one lesson derived from the fighting in 1916 being that tanks were a relatively ineffective weapon against a well-armed position if used in small numbers against it, they revolutionized tank warfare by attacking with a large number in one location. The fact that the adoption of this tactic played a significant role in the 1940 German Panzer Division's success is all the more apparent when one contrasts it with the failure of the French tanks, which, far from being concentrated in one area, were spread thinly over the battlefield. Unlike the French, the British had not invested in enough tanks before the fighting started. But because they had learned something from their tank experiences in the First World War, albeit not as much as